What I'm about to tell you will change how you see destiny. This is the story of a man who had nothing, except everything that actually matters. And somehow, impossibly, 30 years of invisible goodness led to a moment so unlikely, so perfectly timed, that you'll question whether grace is real or if it's the only thing that's ever been real. His name was Marcus Webb, 43 years old, night custodian at Meridian Tower, one of those glass and steel monuments to success in downtown Seattle. The kind of building where people in $1,000 suits walk past people in work uniforms without seeing them at all. Marcus started his shift at 10 p.m., finished at 6 a.m., and had been doing it for 11 years. Same hallways, same offices, same invisibility. But let me tell you what nobody knew about Marcus Webb. Nobody except his daughter, anyway. Every morning at 6:15, after his shift ended, Marcus would walk 4 blocks to Riverside Elementary. He'd wait outside the gate, still in his custodian uniform, until the morning staff arrived at 7. Then he'd head home, sleep until 1 p.m., wake up, help his daughter Zoe with homework, make dinner, spend the evening being her father, and then do it all over again. Single dad for 9 years, ever since the accident that took his wife Sarah. The alarm went off at 4 a.m. that particular morning. Not his alarm, the building's alarm. Fire suppression system malfunction on the 42nd floor. Marcus was there in 3 minutes helping the overnight executives evacuate, making sure everyone got out safely, staying behind to shut down the system manually because he'd learned how things worked in that building. He'd learned how everything worked, actually. 11 years of night shifts, you notice things. You learn things. You become the person who knows where the backup generator is, how to override the elevator lockout, which stairwell door doesn't seal properly. By the time the fire department cleared the building, it was almost 6 a.m. Marcus had 30 minutes to get everything back to normal, finish his rounds, and still make it to his daughter's school on time. Because Zoe was 9 years old, and 9-year-old girls notice when their father doesn't show up. He made it with 2 minutes to spare, stood outside those gates like he did every morning, waiting for the staff to arrive so he knew she was safe before he went home to sleep. One of the morning teachers, Mrs. Patterson, she always acknowledged him. Small wave, little smile. Most people didn't. Most people walked right past the man in the custodian uniform like he was part of the architecture. But Mrs. Patterson, she saw him. She'd told him once, "Zoe talks about you constantly. You're her hero, you know that?" Marcus had smiled, embarrassed. "I'm just her dad." "Exactly," Mrs. Patterson had said. "You're just her dad, every single morning, rain or shine, tired or not. That's what heroes look like." But what nobody knew, what Marcus himself didn't know that morning as he stood outside those elementary school gates, was that someone had been paying attention. Someone had been watching, not in a creepy way, in a way that would change everything. Let me show you what character looks like when no one's watching. 2 weeks earlier, Marcus had found a wallet in the executive washroom on the 42nd floor. Black leather, expensive, $500 cash inside, 3 credit cards, driver's license for someone named Richard Castellano, senior vice president of something or other. Marcus didn't know, didn't matter. He could have pocketed the cash. Who would have known? Night custodian finds money, keeps money, that's not even a crime really. That's just survival. And God knows Marcus could have used $500. Zoe needed new shoes. The car needed new tires. His own shoes had holes in them he'd been ignoring for 6 months. But Marcus Webb didn't keep the wallet. He turned it in to building security, filled out the form, went back to his rounds. When Richard Castellano came looking for it the next morning, security called Marcus in early, pulled him off his sleep schedule, to verify the contents. Every dollar was there, every card. Castellano had offered him a reward. $200 for your honesty, that's more than fair. Marcus had declined. "I didn't return it for a reward, sir. I returned it because it wasn't mine." Castellano had looked at him for a long moment. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time. Then he'd nodded slowly and walked away. Marcus thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Here's what Marcus didn't know. Richard Castellano was the father-in-law of Victoria Chen, And Victoria Chen was the 38-year-old CEO of Chen Enterprises, the company that owned Meridian Tower, along with 47 other properties across North America. And Richard Castellano had mentioned the night custodian to his daughter-in-law, mentioned the man who returned his wallet, mentioned the quiet integrity of someone nobody ever noticed. And Victoria Chen had remembered. Because Victoria Chen was looking for someone. Had been looking for someone her entire life, actually. Ever since her mother's death 15 years ago, when she'd inherited a photograph and a story that seemed impossible. But before I tell you what was in that photograph, you need to understand what happened next. Because what happened next is why this story matters. It was a Tuesday morning, late April, when Victoria Chen arrived at Meridian Tower at 5:45 a.m. Unannounced. Unscheduled. She walked into the building carrying a manila folder and asked the security guard where she could find Marcus Webb. The guard looked confused. The night custodian? He's probably on rounds. 42nd floor, maybe? But ma'am, with respect, is there something I can help you with? Maybe building management? I need to see Marcus Webb, Victoria said quietly. It's personal. Personal. The CEO of the company that owned the building needed to see the night custodian about something personal. The security guard called Marcus's radio, told him to report to the lobby. Immediately. Marcus's first thought was that he'd done something wrong. You don't get called to the lobby at 5:45 a.m. unless something's wrong. Maybe he'd missed something. Maybe the fire alarm malfunction had been his fault somehow. Maybe after 11 years of invisible competence, he'd finally screwed up badly enough to be seen. He took the elevator down. Uniform rumpled from 8 hours of work. Hands still damp from cleaning the break room on 37. When the doors opened, he saw her immediately. Asian woman, late 30s. Elegant even in business casual, holding a folder against her chest like it contained something fragile. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Surprise, recognition, something Marcus couldn't name. Marcus Webb? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem? No, she said softly. No problem. I'm Victoria Chen. I own this building. I need to talk to you about something that's going to sound impossible. And that's when everything started to change. But not in the way you'd expect. If you're watching from London, New York, São Paulo, Manila, wherever you are right now, leave me a comment with your city. I want to know where this story is reaching. Because what I'm about to tell you next, it matters everywhere. Character matters everywhere. Victoria Chen led Marcus to a small conference room off the lobby. 5:45 in the morning, building mostly empty, just the overnight security and the early arrivals. She gestured for him to sit. He sat, uncomfortable, still wondering what he'd done wrong. She placed the manila folder on the table between them. Didn't open it yet. Just looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes like she was trying to reconcile something. Mr. Webb, she began. My mother passed away 15 years ago. Before she died, she gave me a photograph. Just one. Told me it was the most important thing she'd ever give me. She said that when I was ready, when the time was right, I would understand what it meant. Marcus nodded slowly, not understanding at all. Victoria continued. She told me about a day in December 30 years ago. She was 24, living in Seattle, working as a bank teller. She'd just found out she was pregnant with me. She was walking home from work, carrying groceries, and she slipped on ice. Fell hard. Groceries everywhere, her ankle twisted, lying on the sidewalk in pain. Do you know what most people did? They walked past her, Marcus said quietly. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. Yes, exactly. They walked past her. It was cold, getting dark. She was crying from the pain and the fear. What if she'd hurt the baby? And people just stepped around her groceries, kept walking. She opened the folder, pulled out a photograph, old and faded, edges worn from being handled, slid it across the table to Marcus. But one person stopped, she said. A teenage boy, maybe 15, 16 years old. He helped my mother up, collected all her groceries, walked her the 6 blocks to her apartment, refused to give his name, refused any reward, just made sure she was safe, and then he was gone. My mother never forgot him. She said he had the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. She said she knew somehow that her daughter was going to be okay because there were people like that in the world. Marcus looked down at the photograph. Faded color, decades old. A woman sitting on her couch, smiling despite the ice pack on her ankle, grocery bags visible in the background. And standing awkwardly to the side, looking like he wanted to leave but hadn't yet, was a teenage boy. Dark hair, skinny, wearing a too big jacket. Marcus's hands started shaking. The next day, Victoria continued, her voice soft. My mother went back to that street, waited for hours, never saw him again. But she'd had a disposable camera in her purse. She'd insisted on taking his picture before he left. He'd tried to refuse, but she'd been adamant. She told him, I need to remember that there's goodness in the world. He'd finally agreed. One picture. Then he was gone. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't look up from the photograph, because he remembered. God help him, he remembered that day. He'd been 15 years old. December, freezing cold, walking home from his after-school job at the grocery store. He'd seen the woman fall, seen everyone walk past her, and something in him, something his mother had taught him, something about treating people the way you'd want your own mother treated. He'd stopped, helped her, walked her home. It had seemed like nothing. It had seemed like what any decent person would do. He'd forgotten about it the next day. Life moved on. High school, then college, then Sarah, then Zoe, then Sarah's death, then 11 years of night shifts and single fatherhood and invisible exhaustion. That moment on the icy sidewalk had been buried under 30 years of living. But Victoria Chen's mother had kept the photograph, had told her daughter the story, had said it mattered. Mr. Webb, Victoria said, and her voice was thick with emotion. I've been looking for you for 15 years, ever since my mother died. She never knew your name, never knew where you were. Just had this photograph and the memory of a kind teenager who stopped when nobody else would. She told me, find him if you can. Thank him if you can. Because people like that, they're rare. They're what makes the world bearable. Marcus finally looked up, eyes wet. I didn't do anything special. That's what makes it special, Victoria said. You didn't do it for recognition. You didn't do it for reward. You just did it because it was right. My mother saw your character in 30 seconds. She spent 30 years grateful for it. And when my father-in-law mentioned a night custodian who returned his wallet, refused a reward, said he did it because it was right. I had to meet you. I had to see if maybe... She pulled out a second photograph from the folder. Recent, high resolution, blown up. It was Marcus, taken from building security footage, the night he'd turned in the wallet. She placed it next to the 30-year-old photograph. Same eyes, same expression, same quiet integrity, visible even across 3 decades. You're the man in my dreams, Victoria said, and she was crying now. Not romantically. I mean, my mother talked about you my whole childhood. The boy who stopped. The boy who cared. She said she prayed for you sometimes. Prayed that whatever life you were living, you were happy. That your kindness had been rewarded. I grew up with this idea of you as, I don't know, proof that goodness exists. Marcus Webb sat in that conference room, 5:58 in the morning, still in his custodian uniform, looking at a photograph of himself at 15, and he didn't know what to say. What do you say when someone tells you that a moment you'd forgotten had shaped their entire life? You're probably thinking to yourself right now, this is where he gets rescued. This is where the CEO offers him a better job, solves all his problems, gives him money. But that's not what this story is about. Because Marcus Webb didn't need rescuing. He needed recognition. And there's a difference. Have you ever done something good that nobody noticed? Tell me in the comments. Because I think most of you watching this, you've been Marcus Webb. You've stopped when others walked past. You've returned the wallet. You've helped the stranger. And nobody knew. Nobody saw. But someone always sees. Even if it takes 30 years. Victoria Chen didn't offer Marcus a job. Not right away. What she did was this. She asked him about his life. Really asked. And Marcus, exhausted and emotional and caught completely off guard, told her. Told her about Sarah's death, about raising Zoe alone, about the night shifts and the morning waits at the school gates and the constant exhaustion and the quiet pride of being her father. Victoria listened. Really listened. And when he was done, she said, "My mother would have loved knowing what kind of man you became. She always said she could tell. She said you could see character in someone's eyes, and she saw it in yours when you were 15. Looks like she was right." Then she asked him a question that would change everything. What do you want, Marcus? Not what you think you deserve. Not what's realistic. What do you actually want from life? Nobody had ever asked Marcus Webb that question. Not in 9 years. Maybe not ever. He thought about it. Really thought about it. And then he said, "I want Zoe to know that being good matters. I want her to see that doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching, that it means something. I want her to grow up believing that character attracts grace. Because if she doesn't believe that," his voice broke. "If she doesn't believe that, then what am I teaching her? That good people finish last? That integrity is for suckers?" Victoria Chen nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "then let's prove it to her." And that's when the real story began. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about Victoria Chen. She wasn't just a CEO, she was the daughter of immigrants, the granddaughter of refugees, someone who'd built her empire on the belief that character compounds, that treating people with dignity creates loyalty, that seeing the invisible creates something more valuable than profit. She'd been designing a program for 6 months. Scholarship fund, mentorship pipeline, support system for single parents working service jobs in her properties. She had the capital, she had the infrastructure. What she didn't have was the right person to run it. Someone who understood the stakes. Someone with credibility. Someone who embodied the values she wanted to promote. She'd interviewed candidates, all qualified, all impressive. None of them right. And then her father-in-law mentioned the night custodian who returned his wallet. And then she saw the security footage. Marcus staying late during the fire alarm, helping people evacuate, making sure everyone was safe before he even thought about leaving. And then she compared that footage to the 30-year-old photograph her mother had kept. Same person, same character. 30 years of consistency. Victoria Chen offered Marcus Webb a position, Director of Dignity Initiatives. Salary 4 times what he made as a custodian. Office on the 42nd floor. Daylight hours so he could take Zoe to school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. Purpose-built to help people like him. Single parents, invisible workers. People doing everything right and still struggling. Marcus's first response was to say no. "I'm not qualified," he said. "I'm a custodian. I don't have business experience. I don't have connections. I don't even have a college degree." "You have 30 years of doing the right thing when nobody was watching," Victoria said. "You have the respect of every person who works in this building. You have character that's been tested by circumstance and never broken. Mr. Webb, I can hire people with business degrees. I cannot hire people with integrity like yours. It's too rare." But Marcus was stubborn, scared. "What if I fail? What if I let you down?" Victoria smiled. "My mother kept your photograph for 30 years. She died believing that somewhere out there, the boy who stopped to help her was living a good life. I'd like to prove her right. I'd like Zoe to see what happens when character is finally recognized. I'd like single parents in my buildings to know that someone sees them. Someone values them. And I'd like that someone to be you." Marcus took the job. Started the following Monday. Day shift. Office with windows. Business cards that said, Director of Dignity Initiatives under his name. The first thing he did was create a fund for emergency childcare, because he remembered every time he'd had to bring Zoe to work with him, let her sleep in the break room while he finished his shift, hoped nobody noticed. The second thing he did was implement a program where service workers could earn scholarships for their kids, because he remembered calculating whether Zoe's future college tuition was even possible on his salary. The third thing he did was start a mentorship pipeline, pairing executives with custodians, showing both groups that everyone in the building had value. And the fourth thing, the thing that made Victoria Chen cry when she heard about it, he set up a fund in Sarah Webb's name, for widowed parents, for people doing the impossible alone, for invisible heroes. What's the most invisible sacrifice you've made for your family? Comment below. Because I guarantee you, someone noticed. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in any way that felt rewarding at the time, but character has a way of being seen. 6 months into his new position, Marcus was featured in a Seattle Times article. From night custodian to executive, how one company is redefining value. The article went viral. Other companies reached out, started similar programs. The impact spread, but here's what the article didn't capture. Here's what matters more than any of that. Marcus still arrived at Riverside Elementary every morning, still waited outside the gates until the staff arrived, because he was still Zoe's dad. That hadn't changed. What changed was that now he arrived in daylight instead of exhausted from a night shift. What changed was that Zoe saw her father being honored for the same qualities she'd always seen in him: the kindness, the consistency, the integrity. One evening, about 8 months after he'd started his new job, Zoe asked him a question. She was 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and she looked up at him and said, "Dad, did you know this would happen? When you helped that lady all those years ago, did you know someone would remember?" Marcus sat down across from her. "No, honey. I helped her because it was right, not because I thought I'd get something from it." "But you did get something from it," Zoe said. "You got your job. You got recognized." "I did," Marcus acknowledged. "But that's not why I did it. And if I'd never been recognized, if nobody had ever known, it would still have been the right thing to do. You understand that?" Zoe thought about it. Then she said, "Mrs. Patterson told me something. She said you're at school every morning, that you've never missed a day in 4 years. That's a lot of mornings, Dad." "It is," Marcus said. "Do you think anyone notices?" Zoe asked. Marcus smiled. "You notice. That's enough." "But someone else noticed too," Zoe said. "Mrs. Chen noticed. She noticed you were good." "She did." "So maybe," Zoe said carefully, "maybe being good matters even when people don't see it. But maybe people see it more than we think. And that's the lesson. That's what this story is actually about. You're probably wondering about Victoria Chen. What happened there? Because I see the comments already forming. They fell in love, right? They got married, right? That's the real turnaround. But that's not this story. This story is better than that. Victoria Chen and Marcus Webb became friends, deep friends, the kind of friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. She was married happily to a man who'd watched his mother-in-law keep that photograph for decades and understood exactly what it meant to his wife to find the person in it. Victoria's husband, James, he met Marcus 3 months into the new job, shook his hand, smiled, said, "My mother-in-law would have been so happy to know you're happy. She worried about you, you know, the boy who helped her. Hoped you had a good life." "I had a good life," Marcus said quietly. "Even before this. It was hard, but it was good. I had my daughter. I had my integrity. That's not nothing." "No," James agreed. "That's everything." Are you a single dad watching this? Tell me your city in the comments, because I want you to hear this next part especially carefully. 1 year after Marcus started his new position, Chen Enterprises expanded the Dignity Initiatives program to all 47 of their properties. Hundreds of service workers got scholarships for their kids. Dozens got promoted into management positions. The company's retention rate went up. Their reputation improved. Profit margins increased because turnover costs dropped and employee loyalty rose. Business journals called it a humanitarian success story. Corporate responsibility done right. Win-win for everyone involved. But Victoria Chen said something in an interview that stuck with me. She said, "We didn't create this program to be nice. We created it because character is valuable. Because the people who show up every day, do the work nobody notices, treat others with dignity even when they're exhausted. Those people are assets. They're not invisible. We were just looking at the wrong things." Marcus Webb was invited to speak at a conference. Corporate leadership, HR executives, business owners. They wanted to know how Chen Enterprises had achieved such remarkable results. Marcus stood at the podium, 44 years old now, wearing a suit instead of a custodian uniform, looking out at hundreds of people who wanted to learn his secret. And he told them the truth. "There's no secret," he said. "You just have to see people. Really see them. Not their job title, not their circumstances. See their character, see their effort, see their humanity, and then honor it, not with empty praise, with opportunity, with dignity, with recognition that matches reality." Someone in the audience asked, "But how do you identify character? How do you know who deserves opportunity?" Marcus thought about it. Then he said, "You watch what people do when nobody's watching. You notice who stays late to help, who returns the wallet, who stops when someone falls. Character isn't loud, it's not impressive, it's just consistent, it's just there, and if you pay attention, if you actually look, you'll see it everywhere." Another person asked, "What if you invest in someone and they disappoint you?" Marcus smiled. "Then you invested in the wrong thing. You invested in outcomes. Invest in character instead. Character doesn't disappoint, it just compounds." The conference organizers asked Marcus if he'd be willing to speak again. Other venues, other audiences, share the story, spread the model. Marcus said yes, not for himself, for every single parent working night shifts, for every custodian people walk past without seeing, for every person doing everything right and still struggling, for proof that character attracts grace. It's been 3 years now since that morning in the lobby when Victoria Chen showed Marcus Webb the photograph. 3 years since the impossible recognition. 3 years since the turnaround that seemed too good to be true. Here's where they are now. Marcus still works for Chen Enterprises, still runs the Dignity Initiatives program. The program has expanded to include not just single parents but anyone working service jobs who demonstrates exceptional character. They've placed over 400 people in better positions. They've funded over 600 scholarships. They've changed the model. Other companies have adopted similar programs, not because it's trendy, because it works, because character creates loyalty, because seeing people creates value. Zoe is 12 now, straight A student, confident, kind, ambitious in the way kids are when they've seen that doing right leads to living well. She wants to be a civil rights attorney, to help people who are invisible, she says, because she watched her father be invisible for 9 years, and she knows what it costs. Marcus still goes to her school every morning, still waits outside the gates, still makes sure she's safe before he heads to his office. Some things don't change just because circumstances do. Victoria Chen's company has been recognized as one of the best places to work in North America. Their model has been studied by business schools. Their profits are up 32% over 3 years, not in spite of their dignity initiatives, because of them. And Victoria still has that photograph, the one her mother kept for 30 years. It's framed now, hanging in her office with a small plaque underneath. Character compounds, always has, always will. Let me tell you what this story actually reveals. Not about luck, not about destiny, not even about recognition, really. It reveals something about masculinity that our culture has forgotten. Being a man isn't about strength or status or success. It's about showing up. It's about consistency. It's about doing the right thing when nobody's watching and then doing it again the next day and the next day and the next day until it's just who you are. Marcus Webb didn't get recognized because he was special. He got recognized because he was consistent. 30 years between that photograph and that meeting in the lobby. 30 years of being the same person. That's what Victoria Chen's mother saw in a 15-year-old boy. That's what Victoria Chen saw in a 43-year-old custodian. Not potential. Proof. And here's the question I want you to sit with. What would you have done in his place? When you found that wallet with $500, when you were struggling to make ends meet, when your daughter needed shoes and your car needed tires and nobody would have known. What would you have done, I ask, because most people, if they're honest, they would have kept the money. Not because they're bad people, because they're struggling people. Because survival feels more urgent than integrity. But Marcus Webb didn't keep it. And that choice, that one small choice that nobody saw, that led to Richard Castellano mentioning him to Victoria Chen, that led to the recognition, that led to the opportunity. Character compounds, not always obviously, not always quickly, but always eventually. Single dads watching this from Brazil, from Philippines, from Texas, from London, from anywhere. I see your comments. I read them. You tell me about the invisible work you do, the morning routines nobody acknowledges, the sacrifices nobody sees, the exhaustion you push through, the dignity you maintain even when circumstances try to strip it away. I want you to hear this. You are Marcus Webb, every single one of you. Your story might not have the dramatic turnaround. You might not get the photograph and the meeting and the new job. But your character is still compounding. Your consistency is still being noticed, even if only by your children. Your integrity still matters, even if nobody else sees it. Because here's what I believe, and I think Marcus's story proves it. Grace recognizes good men. It always does. Sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it takes 30 years. Sometimes it takes a series of impossible coincidences that only make sense in retrospect. But it happens. Character attracts grace. Not because the universe is fair, because character creates connections. Because doing right builds reputation even when you don't know anyone's watching. Because consistency creates credibility. Because integrity, over time, becomes impossible to ignore. Marcus Webb was invisible for 11 years. He'd been invisible in various ways for most of his life. The teenager people walked past. The grieving widower people avoided. The night custodian nobody noticed. But he was never actually invisible. Victoria Chen's mother saw him. Mrs. Patterson saw him, Zoe saw him, Richard Castellano saw him. And eventually, Victoria Chen saw him. All those years he thought nobody was watching. Turns out everyone was watching. They just showed up at different times. Know a single dad with a turnaround story like this? Send it to us. Include his city. Because these stories need to be told. Not to make people feel good. To make people believe that character matters. That integrity wins. That grace finds good men. I started this channel because I was tired of stories that celebrate luck over character. Tired of narratives where the hero gets rescued instead of recognized. Tired of messages that tell struggling fathers they need to be saved instead of seen. Marcus Webb didn't need saving. He was already living a good life. Hard, yes. Exhausting, yes. But good. He had his daughter. He had his integrity. He had his consistency. What he needed was recognition. And when it came, when Victoria Chen showed him that photograph and told him that a moment he'd forgotten had mattered for 30 years, that wasn't salvation. That was validation. There's a difference. Salvation says you were broken and now you're fixed. Validation says you were good all along and now someone finally sees it. Marcus Webb was always good. Victoria Chen just proved it. Single dads in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in North America. Where are you watching from? Comment your country. Because this isn't just an American story. Character compounds everywhere. Grace recognizes good men in every language, every culture, every circumstance. And if you're watching this not as a single dad, but as someone who walks past custodians without seeing them, who assumes service workers are less valuable, who measures people by their job titles instead of their character. I want you to think about something. How many Marcus Webbs have you walked past? How many people doing extraordinary things in ordinary circumstances have you failed to notice? How much character have you missed because you were looking at the wrong things? The most valuable people are often the most invisible, not because they're hiding, because we're not looking. Victoria Chen learned to look because her mother taught her. Her mother learned to look because a 15-year-old boy stopped when everyone else walked past. Character creates character. Dignity honors dignity. Grace recognizes grace. It compounds. Let me tell you the last thing Marcus Webb said when I talked to him for this video. I asked him what he wanted people to take away from his story. He said, "I want single dads to know that what they're doing matters. Even when it feels invisible. Even when it feels thankless. Even when it feels endless. Your kids see you. And sometimes, when you least expect it, someone else sees you too. So keep showing up. Keep doing right. Keep being consistent, not because you'll definitely get recognized, but because that's who you are. And who you are, that's everything." Then he said something that made me stop the recording and just sit with it for a minute. He said, "I think about Sarah sometimes, my wife. She died 9 years ago, and it broke me. But she saw me. She always saw me. And I think if I'd become someone different after she died, if I'd let the grief and the exhaustion turn me bitter or careless or selfish, I would have lost her twice. Once to death. Once to my own choices. But I stayed who I was. For Zoe, yes. But also for Sarah. Because she saw my character and she loved it, and I wasn't going to let circumstances kill what she loved." And then Victoria Chen showed me that photograph, and I realized Sarah wasn't the only one who saw me. Someone saw me when I was 15. Someone saw me when I was 43. People have been seeing me my whole life. I just didn't know it. So if you're watching this and you feel invisible, I want you to know, you're not. Someone sees you. Your kids see you. And maybe somewhere, someone you helped 30 years ago is telling their daughter about you. Character has a way of being remembered, even when you forget it yourself. That's the message. That's why this story matters. If your children could only inherit one thing from you, what would it be? Your money, your house, your success, or your integrity, your consistency, your character? Because here's the truth that Marcus Webb's story proves. Money runs out. Houses decay. Success fluctuates. But character? Character compounds. Character creates opportunities you can't imagine. Character builds relationships that last decades. Character turns invisible moments into legendary stories. Character attracts grace. Marcus Webb started with nothing except his integrity. He ended with everything that actually matters. His daughter's respect, his community's recognition, his own peace, knowing he'd stayed true to who he was, even when circumstances tried to break him. He didn't have wealth. He didn't have power. He had something better. He had character. And character attracted grace. It took 30 years. It required impossible timing. It needed a photograph kept by a grateful mother and shown to a searching daughter. But it happened. And it happens more often than you think. Not always dramatically. Not always with fairy tale timing. But it happens. Good men get seen. Eventually. Somehow. Grace recognizes good men. It always does. Sometimes it just takes time. If this story moved you, I need you to do something for me. Share it. Share it with a single dad who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's doing everything right and still struggling. Share it with anyone who's ever felt invisible. Leave me a comment. Where are you watching from? What city? What country? I want to know how far this message is traveling. Subscribe to Single Dad Tales because I have more stories like this. Stories of invisible heroes. Stories of character being recognized. Stories that prove integrity wins. And if you're a single dad with a turnaround story, send it to me. Include your city. Include what happened. Include what changed. Because your story might be the one that helps someone else keep going. Character attracts grace. Your story isn't over. The invisible hero is still being written. And somewhere someone is keeping a photograph. Someone is remembering. Someone is watching. You're not invisible. You never were.